Hello, beautiful community. Just a very quick chat about the bizarre British election with a tiny centering of where Ukraine comes into this. And we'll probably talk about all of this much more properly, and I hope you don't feel it's too windy to hear me properly. So, it's not complex with Britain and Ukraine. The incoming Labour government's going to win the election by the time many of you are watching this, is continuing a similar stance on Ukraine to the previous government, but that stance will now be held in somewhat more morally serious and competent hands. More broadly speaking, what Ukraine wants to sustain in Western countries is for the centre to hold. That doesn't mean there can't be constructive pro-Ukrainian positions in Western politics that aren't from the old centre. But the reality is that the pattern we're seeing is a decaying centre that is increasingly losing friction on contact with their citizens' core concerns, surrounded by entrepreneurial and exploitative alternative political forces. It's a bad choice. But in the short term, what Ukraine wants is for that center to hold, and when it doesn't hold, it's bad for Ukraine, and when it holds, it's good. Some of the recent happenings in France are not good for Ukraine. In Britain, the story is that the center will kind of hold for a while longer, and that answers the Ukraine question of whether Ukraine will sit with Britain in the next few years. But that's not a sign of the center re-strengthening, consolidating. So let's say a little bit about why that's the case, why the headline many of you will see in global news that Britain has returned back to the center after peak populism with Brexit, why that headline will be wrong. Brexit in 2016 wasn't peak populism. Peak populism will occur in the 2030s in the UK. And if anything, Brexit squeezed ever more pressure into that unsustainable vessel that is going to blow up at some point. So what am I talking about? Well, Brexit was a project led by a number of political entrepreneurs and post-truth populists who envisioned, without any real chance of delivering this, a global Britain. But their support base was of a completely different sensibility to the exploitative elite that led this. Their support base, the Brexit support base, was anti-globalization, worried about free markets, and exasperated by technocratic governance and technocratic language. So that's already a terribly bad combination when a project is being delivered by a group of people who want to deliver it for reasons that are completely unacceptable to their own support base. So Brexit, even for the most hardcore pro-Brexit citizens in Britain, actually alienated people more from politics. The incoming Labour government is more responsible than the previous Conservative government that failed to seriously differentiate itself from the calamities of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. It wasn't led by a post-truth populist in Rishi Sunak, but it was led by a politician who is 3/4 of the way to being a political entrepreneur. That's the reality of what Rishi is. Keir Starmer is much more morally serious, the leader of the Labour Party. But what we're looking at with Labour is a very cautious political project, almost austerity light, potentially centre right on the economy, Though we're going to have to see how that works out, and that in part depends on the size of the majority they get. They will be more moderate the bigger their majority. They will be less moderate if their majority is smaller, but not in a constructive way. They'll just be more conflictive, not more bold. And they're offering progressive messaging on social issues and a lot of language on class and inequality not matched by their own economic policy. Meanwhile, you've got a sort of silent majority in Britain who feel all the four things that we always talk about: unsafe, powerless, betrayed, and worst of all, they feel the opacity of political institutions. But more concretely than that, in the British context, they feel a great deal of disillusionment with the free market. They feel unheard on immigration, and you know how painful this issue is, because we've got a situation whereby a human rights friendly immigration policy is incompatible with what is civically acceptable in most Western democracies. And I'll talk to you more about why that's such a painful conflict to render politically. They feel fed up with technocratic language and technocratic government, which is what they're really getting the previous administration and with the incoming Labour government. They feel dismayed because they see the National Health Service in extraordinary disrepair. They feel outraged about the situation with the utility companies, which they are open to renationalising. Only 10 to 15% of the British population on polls, including many right-wing people, are actually against the utilisation of utilities. So you have this perception of decline that people feel. You have this sense that the politicians aren't speaking to you directly enough, that people feel, which is why people who exploit this, like Nigel Farage, are certainly genuinely important and dangerous. People feel open to bold action, but not along the lines of conventional ideological divides that we might be familiar with from the 90s. I've just given an example of right-wing people favoring renationalization. And what's simmering really is a kind of crisis of legitimacy that affects the sort of enterprise that the Labour Party is and the sort of enterprise that they're replacing. That will express itself in the 2030s when peak populism for Britain will really occur. It wasn't Brexit. Before then, there's a chance that electoral reform belatedly happens, but the question is, will there be enough bold and responsible political actors who can pull the rug from underneath the exploitative populists and actually directly speak to people's values, people's feelings on the doorstep, and translate that into concrete political proposals. When things get rocky in the 2030s, Britain will be relying on its institutional resilience, as the United States is likely to during the Trump term, for its democracy to survive. In terms of just a brief comment on the state of all the parties, state of most of the parties. The Liberal Democrat Party in Britain has refused to be serious about a national strategy. They've tried to, in an ad hoc way, win a number of seats. And I'm disappointed with that in this age of fragility and distrust. People need more bold and more serious politics than that. Labour is serious on not making mistakes, it's serious on message discipline, and it's offering, as my colleague John Gray pointed out, a much more ethically adequate and responsible management of the decline of the British state than the Tories. The problem with the Tories was that they could never gain seriousness under Rishi Sunak because Rishi lacked the political clarity of vision to properly differentiate himself from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, two calamitous prime ministers, and say, I am different and this is why and this is what we're going to do. Let me mention briefly the Green Party. The Green Party has in Britain decided to mirror European social democratic parties in a way that's kind of compelling because neither the Liberal Democrats nor Labour are offering that. But while that may be compelling as a contribution because it's not being offered elsewhere, I am myself skeptical of the Green Party's climate policy, which is obviously a worry. And I'm really skeptical because what I don't want from the Green Party is a statement of what they would do if they were in power. Because I can sit here and say what I would do if I were in power. You know, I'd make everybody who utters a single deliberate lie wear a badge. I lied. And a bigger badge if they lie twice. And if they lie 3 times, I would implement a permanent, lifelong ban on running for public office. But that's irrelevant because I'm a minor public intellectual with not a single practical political bone in my body. So what I want, instead of saying what they'd do if they win from the Green Party, is to see themselves as a workshop for policies that the bigger parties could be compelled into. Right? What should the big parties be pressured into doing that is specific to Britain's distinctive contribution to mitigating the climate crisis? That's what I want. That's the mechanism of change I want, not what we would do if we came to power. And I'm making this distinct difference too cartoonish, but this is a complaint. That's where we are. We will see what more we have to say after the election happens. Thank you so much for being with me. Lots of love.